The envelope was sealed. The father's hands were shaking. And Dr. Phil did something no one in that studio had ever seen him do before. He stopped everything. The cameras kept rolling, but the script was gone. What happened next would change how America sees family secrets forever. Stop the tape. Dr. Phil's voice cut through the studio like a blade. The production assistant in the booth froze. 3 cameras stayed locked on the stage, but the planned segment was over. In his hand, a white envelope with a lab logo. In his eyes, something the audience had rarely witnessed. Raw, unfiltered concern bordering on anger. Across from him sat Marcus, 47, a truck driver from Ohio, who had just refused to open the DNA test results that could prove whether the 19-year-old woman sitting 3 feet away was actually his daughter. The studio audience, 200 strong, fell into a silence so complete you could hear the air conditioning hum. Dr. Phil walked toward the edge of the stage, envelope still raised, and did something that broke every rule of daytime television. He spoke directly to the camera operator. "Jimmy, keep rolling. I don't care what the producers say. This man needs to see what he's doing." Then he turned back to Marcus. "You came here for answers. Your daughter came here for answers. And now, when we finally have them, you're telling me you're scared to know the truth?" 3 weeks earlier, the Dr. Phil Show received a letter that would become one of the most heartbreaking cases in the program's history. Sarah Martinez, 19, had written in her own handwriting, no typed document, just raw words on notebook paper. "I don't know if the man who raised me is my real father. My mother died 2 years ago without telling me the truth. He refuses to talk about it. I need Dr. Phil's help because I'm losing myself trying to find out who I am." Sarah's mother, Linda, died from cancer, whispering a devastating secret. "There are things about your father I should have told you." She died before explaining. Marcus, who had been the perfect father for 19 years, became defensive and eventually silent whenever Sarah asked about paternity. Their relationship crumbled. Dr. Phil's team spent weeks getting them into the same room. Marcus had resisted, terrified of losing his daughter, but he finally agreed, not for answers, but because the silence was destroying them both. The segment began. Sarah told her story, tears streaming as she described her mother's deathbed confession. Marcus sat rigid, arms crossed. "I raised her. I'm her father. A piece of paper won't change that." Dr. Phil leaned forward. "Marcus, you're right that being a father is about more than biology, but you're wrong about something crucial. Sarah isn't asking you to stop being her dad. She's asking you to be honest with her. There's a difference." Marcus looked away. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue that was already soaked through. That's when Dr. Phil revealed the envelope. "We took the liberty of arranging a DNA test, with your permission, of course, which you both signed off on last week. The results are right here." He held up the sealed envelope. "Sarah, do you want to know what's inside?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Phil turned to Marcus. "And you?" Marcus shook his head. "I don't need to know." The audience gasped. Sarah's face crumpled, and Dr. Phil stood up from his chair, walked to center stage, and said the words that would stop production. "Stop the tape. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. What happened in the next 7 minutes would never make it to air in its raw form, but everyone in that studio would remember it for the rest of their lives." Dr. Phil, envelope still in hand, walked past the cameras and stood directly in front of Marcus. No television tricks, no editing, just 2 men face to face in front of 200 witnesses. "Marcus, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear me." Dr. Phil's voice had dropped to a tone the audience had never heard. Not his television voice, not his therapist's voice, but something deeper and more personal. "I've been doing this for 21 years.
I've seen thousands of families, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the fear in your eyes right now is not about what's in this envelope. It's about what happens after." Marcus said nothing, but his hands were trembling. Dr. Phil continued. "You're afraid that if this test says you're not her biological father, she'll stop loving you. You're afraid she'll see you as a fraud, as someone who's been lying to her. You're afraid that the relationship you've built over 19 years will disappear the moment we open this envelope." Sarah made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. Dr. Phil glanced at her, then back to Marcus. "But here's what you're missing, and this is the part that's going to hurt. By refusing to open this, you're doing exactly what you're afraid of. You're pushing her away. You're making her question whether you ever really loved her, because if you did, you'd be brave enough to face the truth with her." The silence in the studio was deafening. Even the production crew in the booth had stopped moving. Dr. Phil held out the envelope. "This isn't about biology, Marcus. This is about trust. This is about showing your daughter that whatever's in this envelope, you're strong enough to handle it together. Can you do that?" Marcus stared at the envelope. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. But Marcus didn't open it. Instead, he did something no one expected. He handed it to Sarah. "You open it," he said, his voice breaking. "Whatever it says, you're my daughter. But you deserve to know the truth." Then he looked directly at her for the first time since the segment began. "And I should have been brave enough to tell you that a long time ago." Sarah took the envelope with shaking hands. Dr. Phil, still standing at center stage, nodded to her. "Whenever you're ready." The studio was so quiet you could hear the paper tearing. Sarah pulled out a single sheet of official lab results. Her eyes scanned the document once, twice, then a third time.
Her expression shifted from fear to confusion to something that looked almost like relief. She looked up at Marcus. It says you are my biological father. 99.9% probability." Her voice was barely a whisper. Marcus closed his eyes. His shoulders, which had been tense for weeks, months, maybe years, finally relaxed. A sound escaped from him, half laugh, half sob. "I knew. I always knew. But your mother, she had doubts, and I thought if we never confirmed it, if we never looked, then those doubts couldn't hurt us." Dr. Phil walked over and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "But they did hurt you. They hurt both of you, because secrets always do." He looked out at the audience, many of whom were openly crying. "This is what I want everyone watching to understand. The truth isn't your enemy. Fear is. And when you let fear make your decisions, you end up creating the exact outcome you were trying to avoid." Sarah stood up from her chair and crossed the stage. Marcus stood too, uncertain, and then she did what she had been wanting to do for 2 years. She hugged her father. Not the stiff, obligatory hugs they had exchanged since Linda's death, but the kind of hug that says, "I forgive you. I need you. I'm not going anywhere." The audience erupted in applause. Dr. Phil stepped back, giving them space. And in that moment, something shifted in the studio. This wasn't just another episode. This was a reminder of why people watch Dr. Phil in the first place. Not for the drama, but for the moments when walls come down and families find their way back to each other. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. After the segment wrapped and the audience had filed out, Dr. Phil did something he rarely does. He broke protocol again. He asked the crew to leave the stage. He, Marcus, and Sarah sat in those chairs for another 45 minutes. No cameras, no microphones, just 3 people talking about grief, fear, trust, and what comes next. Later, Dr. Phil would tell his producers that this was the episode that reminded him why he does this work.
People think this show is about confrontation or tough love or calling people out, he said. But it's really about creating a space where people can be honest with each other, maybe for the first time in their lives. That's what happened today. And that envelope? That wasn't the important part. The important part was Marcus finally being brave enough to face his fear with his daughter standing next to him. The episode aired 3 weeks later. The network executives wanted to edit out the part where Dr. Phil stopped production, arguing it broke the fourth wall and disrupted the narrative flow. Dr. Phil refused. That's the most important part, he insisted. That's the moment when everyone watching realizes this isn't just television. These are real people with real pain, and sometimes you have to stop pretending everything is fine and just deal with what's in front of you. The episode became one of the most watched in the show's history. Social media exploded with reactions. Hashtag Dr. Phil DNA trended for 3 days. But more importantly, the show's inbox flooded with messages from families who said the episode had inspired them to have difficult conversations they'd been avoiding for years. Marcus and Sarah appeared on the show again 6 months later for a follow-up segment. The difference was remarkable. They had started family therapy together. Marcus had joined a grief support group to process Linda's death, something he had refused to do when it happened. Sarah had returned to college and was thriving, but most importantly, they had learned to talk to each other again. Really talk, without the fear of secrets lurking in every conversation. The envelope was never really about DNA, Sarah told Dr. Phil during that follow-up. It was about whether my dad trusted me enough to be vulnerable, and whether I trusted him enough to still love him, no matter what the results said. We both learned something that day. Love isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about being brave enough to face the truth together. But what happened next is something no one in the room or watching at home saw coming. During the follow-up taping 6 months later, Dr. Phil revealed something he had kept private. Marcus had always known the truth. Linda's deathbed words weren't real doubts. She was delirious from medication. Marcus knew, but feared Sarah wouldn't believe him, that she'd think he was covering something up. So he stayed silent, hoping it would go away. When Dr. Phil shared this, Marcus reached for Sarah's hand. She took it without hesitation. Dr. Phil looked directly into the camera. Fear makes us do things that hurt the people we love most. But courage gives us a second chance. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Marcus and Sarah found their way back because they chose truth over comfort. That's the lesson. Not the DNA test, not the envelope. Just two people deciding that love was worth the risk of being honest. The audience stood. The applause wasn't polite, it was cathartic. And in that moment, everyone understood why this episode mattered. Because somewhere, someone watching was holding on to a secret that was destroying their family. And maybe, just maybe, they would find the courage to let it go. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Dr. Phil walked off stage that day knowing he had done more than host a television show. He had created a space where a father and daughter could stop running from the truth and start rebuilding trust. The envelope had been opened, the secret was gone, and what remained was what had been there all along. A family that loved each other enough to fight through the fear. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop pretending everything is fine and face what's breaking you. Marcus and Sarah did that, and their story became a reminder that healing doesn't start when you have all the answers. It starts when you're finally brave enough to ask the right questions.